But first, we're following breaking news on the Iran war. President Trump says U.S. negotiators will be in Pakistan tomorrow for talks in Islamabad. On Truth Social, he accused Iran of violating the ceasefire agreement by firing on vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and threatened to destroy civilian infrastructure in Iran if it does not take the deal the U.S. is offering. The president writes, if they don't, the United States is going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Joining us now, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde. Jackie, how about you tell David the highlights of your conversation with the President of the United States?
Yeah, David, thanks for joining us this morning. Basically, the top line here from our brief conversation during commercial breaks was that J.D. Vance is not going to be leading the delegation to Islamabad for the talks with the Iranians this week. It's just going to be Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The reason the president gave us was that there are security reasons, potentially not enough time for Secret Service to make sure that the vice president's able to travel over there safely. I'm wondering if you have any initial reactions to this, or whether you think that it's possible that the vice president has been sidelines, and if you have any sort of reporting from your diplomatic sources about how they felt the vice president's performance was during the first round of negotiations.
Not having J.D. Vance there, I think, hurts the chances for an agreement. The Iranians wanted J.D. Vance there. They felt that he's opposed this war. He's opposed forever wars, previously. And there's been reporting that he actually told the president he didn't support this war, but when the president told him he was going to attack Iran, J.D. Vance said, go big and go fast, meaning hit them fast and make it hard and make it a short war. This claim of inadequate security doesn't make any sense. I spent years reporting in Islamabad, and a close friend of mine who I worked with then from the New York Times, he's now an editor of a local paper, they locked down the entire city for these negotiations. The negotiations are held in the Serena Hotel. That's where diplomats stay, and it's quite safe. So I think Steve Witkoff leading these negotiations is a mistake. There were two previous rounds of negotiations that Witkoff led with Iran. Jared Kushner was with him for the last round. Those both ended in surprise Israeli and U.S. airstrikes. The Iranians do not trust Steve Witkoff. They feel he didn't fully understand the final offer they made in terms of their nuclear program. But all that said, it's very good that there will be talks in Pakistan, but I just want to explain the dynamics in terms of what the Iranians might be thinking.
David, one of the things that the president said was that, I'm looking at the transcript of the conversation that happened here around the table, was that Iran would agree to never again have nuclear ambitions, to never again have to put those ambitions to actual work. That seems out of place with how the Iranians have been behaving this entire time, with really how many countries nowadays would operate, allowing a sovereign nation to tell them that they can never do something. What are you hearing from your sources? Is that square at all with what they are telling you?
So again, and I just apologize to you and to viewers. So the president's statements are just inaccurate in that Iran has said dozens of times, including before we started attacking them, that they did not intend to make a nuclear weapon. If the president was talking about, trying to get all of their enriched uranium, they've got about 1,000 pounds of it. It's not enriched to bomb level that you can make a nuclear bomb, but they might be able to enrich it if they could rebuild their centrifuges. They've been destroyed. So this point about promising to never have a nuclear weapon, I don't understand it, because the supreme leader, the one who has died, the Khamenei, the older one, issued a fatwa that Iran would never develop a nuclear weapon. Many Americans, including the Obama and Biden administration, didn't trust that promise. And obviously Israel didn't and shouldn't. But I don't understand this sort of condition. And then you're right, it is sort of dictating to a sovereign country what they're going to do. A compromise is that, look, the United Arab Emirates has nuclear power, but they bring in enriched uranium from other countries, from the U.S., from Russia. And this is sort of a point of Iranian pride, and I'm not saying we should give in to Iranian pride, but there is a way for them to have a small nuclear program that they can use to generate electricity. It's kind of crazy given that they have oil, but the UAE and other countries do this, but they don't enrich the uranium, and that's why there's no concern in the United Arab Emirates that they're somehow going to make a nuclear bomb. So anyway, go ahead.
Finish your thought. No, finish your thought. David.
I'm excited they're going. There should be a peace deal. It's not going to be easy, and I think the broad outlines of a deal are there. But we can talk about that in a bit.
David, one of the things that Jackie asked the president about was China, and why he felt that they have been terrific. And part of the things he said was they haven't done anything that they haven't been a factor, which is very nice. They haven't been trying to block, the blockade, as we call it. They haven't been doing anything. They've been great. China's been great. I'm trying to understand, how does that square with reports that the Chinese have been helping the Iranians in their fight, in this war with the United States?
An excellent question. So there was a Financial Times story that said that the Chinese have been providing satellite imagery. Russia has been doing this as well. And that a U.S. official confirmed to me that story is correct. That would be satellite imagery that would help the Iranians target U.S. forces. Again, Russia's been doing the same thing. And then there was a separate CNN reporting, the New York Times matched it to a certain extent. And then again, I had a U.S. official confirm it to me that China was preparing to send shoulder-fired or some sort of anti-aircraft system to the Iranians. It's not clear they actually sent that. In terms of the blockade, I think the president's trying to give China credit, and it is a positive thing that when the U.S. started blocking Iranian tankers, they were largely taking oil from Iran to China. The Chinese didn't militarily try to get involved there. That could have started a very dangerous, broader conflict with China. So that is a positive step. I see that China, like so many countries, is just eager for a deal here. So I'm hoping, again, that these talks in Islamabad go well.
All right. All right. MS Now's David Rohde, thank you very much for coming to The Weekend. Joining us now, former Indiana Senator and former Ambassador to the Holy See, Joe Donnelly. Ambassador Donnelly, thank you for being here. Would just love to get your reaction to what we've been talking about, Jackie's conversation with President Trump about what's going on with Iran. That also, I'd love to get your reaction to what David Rohde just reported, which is, as the president told Jackie, Vice President Vance will not be with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner at the negotiating table. And David Rohde said that it's unfortunate that Vance is not going because that means the less likelihood of a deal, since the Iranians want to talk with J.D. Vance. He was just there a week ago. Do you share that same pessimism?
Yeah, I think one of the things here is that President Trump has such a comfort level with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. I don't know that he actually has that comfort level with J.D. Vance, and he knows Vice President Vance didn't really agree with him on this at the start. The opposite of that is the Iranians do not trust Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, as was mentioned. They've negotiated twice, and both ended up with their country being bombed. And so I think it would have been a plus if the vice president was there. I'm glad they're going to negotiate, but I think that the central person that the Iranians trusted will not be there.
One of the things that has been very, I think, probably interesting should be a loaded term there, as watching these negotiations take place, is on one end you have Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, J.D. Vance. At one point, he won't be going to this round of talks, sitting down with Pakistan, then sitting down with the Iranians and trying to hammer out a deal, while you have the president of the United States tweeting out the kinds of things that we've seen today, including saying that he was going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. They'll come down fast, they'll come down easy. And if they don't take the deal, it will be my honor to do what has to be done. Can you speak to the difficulty that it creates in that negotiating room when you have the president of the United States tweeting these kinds of threats? Or is it actually a benefit for Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to say, if this doesn't happen, you saw what the President of the United States said he's prepared to do?
Well, I don't think it's a benefit. This is the second time he's brought this discussion up about the power plants and the bridges. And I think what's beginning to happen is that on the Iranian side, they start to filter that out because they've heard it before. They've been attacked twice. They want to come to an agreement that makes sense for them. The United States wants to come to an agreement that makes sense for us. And so these threats are thrown in there, but I don't think they're going to change the discussions one way or the other because it's a pattern of negotiation, and it's not actually moving the ball forward at all.
And Senator, I want to pivot to one of your former jobs, the ambassador to the Holy See. But before we go in there, I just heard, I just pinged a bunch of my sources to kind of get their reaction to the decision not to send the vice president. And Steve Bannon just wrote to me to say the cooler has been benched, reinforcing one of the points that you just made about potentially the lack of trust here. But let's pivot to the conversation about the Pope. I guess first, what was your overall reaction? And having spent time, I think, potentially working probably with, were you working with Pope Francis at some point? I assume you had interactions with him?
I work with Pope Francis on almost a daily, if not daily, every week basis. Absolutely.
How unusual was it for Pope Leo to sort of engage in this back and forth? I mean, it feels like something Pope Francis wouldn't have done. What are sort of the differences that you're seeing so far emerge between the leadership of the two popes?
Sure. Well, I actually think Pope Francis, Pope Leo would have both engaged because what they're doing is preaching the gospel, which is love for your fellow citizens. I think that almost as a controlling document, you could imagine Matthew 25, which is whatever you do for the least of us, you do for me. And I think Leo feels an obligation to talk about trying to protect those in need, to protect those who are struggling. And I think in part, President Trump's problem is, you know, as funny as this may sound, he's kind of jealous of Leo, that Leo is an American who has extraordinary attention around the world. And up till now, there's only been President Trump, and now he has to share the stage. And